Hey guys, it's Courtney, and today I'm going to be making a one-layer card using the Road Trip stamp set by Simon Hurley Create. And I was Googling some photos of some sunset scenes, and I came across this one, and I loved it with the palm trees on that kind of that little island over there. So I decided to use this as my inspiration. So I'm going to start by doing my ink blending, and pretty much that's going to be a majority of the card is going to be the ink blending. So I'm taking a piece of the Simon Hurley Stark White cardstock. This is a pretty heavyweight cardstock and it's really good for blending. Just going to use a piece of Post-it note tape and the grid lines on my work surface to make sure it's straight, just to mask out the bottom portion of my card. I'm going to be working on the top first. So working on the sky. I'm going to be using 6 different colors of ink, and I'm going to start off with a very light hand, kind of start with the lightest and move my way out. And I'm not really too concerned with them blending at this point. I'm just kind of getting down the color. So the colors that I'm going to be using in the order that I'm using it is Over the Moon, Slippery When Wet, Guppy, Traffic Cone, Prom Queen, and finishing off with Triple Berry. So you can see I'm kind of just plopping down the color, and you really don't get too much of a variation at this point with at least the yellows, but we will. So the thing that you have to remember about the Simon Hurley Create inks, or whatever inks you're going to be using for your ink blending, is you have to know the properties of that ink. So these particular inks are dye inks, which means that they don't necessarily sit on top of the paper. They kind of seep into it. So they are different from like the Distress Oxides that kind of sit on top of the paper and you have a ton of time to work with them, and they're kind of, I don't know, they stay wet, very wet for a long period of time. Dye inks are not so much like that. So you want to make sure that you're kind of scribbling off on some scratch piece of paper. I always like to work on a scrap piece of paper because I feel like I get better results instead of working on, a craft mat or something like that where I can continuously pick up the ink that I have left behind. Where a scrap piece of paper, it's going to kind of just soak into that paper and it is where it is. So once I worked my way up to the top for that Triple Berry, I'm going to work in the opposite direction. And this is where I'm actually going to concentrate on my colors blending. So you'll see that I kind of go back and forth to multiple areas where I feel like I need a better blend, or maybe I need it a little bit darker or a little bit lighter. But by going in with that really light layer to begin with, it allows you to go and fix up areas that you may not be that happy with. So next I wanted to create a sun, which is very hard to see in the pictures, and it's honestly really hard to see in real life too. But I'm taking another little piece of Post-it note tape and I'm using this as my mask. I'm taking a circle punch that I've had in my stash for I don't even know how long, and I'm just going to punch out a half a circle from this little Post-it note tape, and I'm going to lay that down, and I'm using the outer edge of it, and I'm using the lightest color, which is the Over the Moon. It's a very bright yellow, and I'm just going to go over that inside of where that circle was. And you can kind of see it, kind of not. I probably should have done this first before I actually did my background, but it is what it is. So next I'm going to pretty much do the same thing as I did for the top to the bottom. So I'm going to move that Post-it note tape, and you just want a little bit of the top portion showing through, because the Post-it note tape or any paper mask that you're using is actually adding some dimension. As little as it may be, it's still adding some dimension. So you want to see a tiny bit of the background we've already created peeking through. And that will allow you not to have a white outline. You'll see I end up with one anyway, but you'll see exactly what I mean when I do. So I'm going to go over with the same colors in the same order in the same way. The only thing that I'm leaving out now is the sun, because I felt like it was pretty pointless at this point because you couldn't see it anyway. But I'm pretty much just following the guide that I already have from the top. So where I added the Over the Moon on the top, I'm adding the Over the Moon on the bottom. And basically going to be a reflection. This is going to be the water. So anything that's on the sky, you want to see in the water. So you can see that now I've removed that Post-it note tape and I have a little bit of that white outline, which is no big deal in my case because that's where I wanted to add my little island. I'm going to start off with a pencil, and you can barely see it, but I can see it just as my guide. And then I'm going to take my black Copic marker and I'm going to kind of freehand my little island, I guess you can call it. And I'm using the brush nib because that's what I'm used to using, but you can certainly use the chisel end to make sure that you get a nice straight line. So once that's done, I can add my trees. I'm going to stamp the same tree twice, but I want to kind of change the shape of it a little bit. So I'm going to, and this is what's great about photopolymer stamps, is you can kind of manipulate them. So this one is going to be curved a little bit. I'm going to be using Blackout ink by Ink on 3 because it is a Copic safe ink. You want to make sure that you're using a Copic safe ink here, especially if you are using alcohol markers. You don't have to use Copics, but you want to use alcohol markers for your background. The alcohol markers do mix well with the Simon Hurley inks. I didn't have any bleeding or anything like that. And you want to make sure that obviously you're not using any kind of watercolor medium because these inks will react with water. So all I'm doing here is I'm taking my black Copic marker. Once again, you can use any black alcohol marker here. You can use a Sharpie if you want to. And I am just outlining each little portion of these trees and filling them in solid with black. So I'm using one or doing one leaf at a time just because I found that to be easiest for me, but whatever you feel comfortable with. And like I said, just make sure that you're using an alcohol marker safe ink because as you color, you may smear it. I'm also bringing out the packaging because I kind of lost some of my lines. I should have probably used a stamp positioner here because it's quite a big image, but I'm just using the packaging as my guide so I know exactly where the leaves of the palm tree are. And also, nobody's going to see the black outline of the stamped image. So you don't have to necessarily be perfect. If you happen to go out of the lines a little bit, just extend that part of the image out a little bit. Nobody's ever going to notice the difference because it's a silhouette. We've turned this into a silhouette image. So I finished up both of those palm trees, and then I'm going to finish off with one of the sentiments from the same stamp set, and I am going to stamp this right next to my palm trees. And this is in the shape of a circle, and if you take a look at the stamp set, it actually goes inside of a sun, but I'm using it on its own. I certainly could have stamped the sun, but it wasn't really necessarily realistic looking, and I wanted this to be more realistic. So I stamped that with VersaFine Onyx Black ink. Keep in mind that this will take a little bit of time to dry along with your Copic markers. They won't bleed, but you want to make sure that you don't smear your finger across them right away. So I ended up trimming this down just a little bit, and I wanted to make sure that it was nice and even, and I didn't have any of those ink smudges on the sides that we sometimes get with ink blending. So I ended up trimming it down about 1/4 of an inch total. And then I'm also going to take a piece of black cardstock, and I'm going to cut that just a little bit larger than my panel. So it's about 1/8 of an inch smaller than an A2 size card. That way I have a little bit of a black border showing as well as a little bit of a white border showing, and that's really going to make everything pop. Glued everything together with my Tombow Mono multi glue, and that is it. Super simple card, but this one was fun, guys. You could do all sorts of backgrounds with these inks. So as always, I will leave the supplies listed in the description box below. Thanks so much for stopping by, and have a great day. Bye.